The roar of engines, the gleam of freshly finished wood, the image of mastery and control. This is what the world thinks it knows about Leo behind Samson Boat Company. But behind the viral success, behind the millions of views and the quiet admiration of strangers, there exists a far heavier truth. A truth shaped not by triumph, but by pressure, by silence, by expectations that grew faster than the boats themselves. What happens when a man becomes a symbol before he has fully understood himself? When passion turns into obligation, and craftsmanship into a cage. Leo's story is not simply about boats. It is about identity slowly eroding under the weight of public scrutiny, personal relationships strained by absence, and a private life dissected by curiosity. As success rises, so does the cost. And somewhere between the workshop lights and the empty moments after filming ends, a question lingers. Did fame save Leo, or did it quietly begin to break him? The workshop breathes softly, a low mechanical hum woven with the faint scrape of sandpaper against wood. Light filters through high windows, catching dust particles midair, turning them into drifting embers. This is where Leo stands most days. Hands steady, posture composed, surrounded by the silent witnesses of his life's work. To the outside world, this space represents mastery, purpose, and control. But beneath the warm glow and carefully framed shots lies a pressure that never switches off. Samson Boat Company is no longer just a workshop. It is a symbol. Thousands watch from afar, dissecting every movement, every decision, every delay. Each plank Leo shapes carries more than structural importance. It carries expectation. The wood does not argue, but the audience does. Comments echo louder than the machines. Praise arrives fast, but criticism lingers longer, embedding itself deep beneath the surface. In this space, there is no such thing as a small mistake anymore. Every flaw feels permanent, archived, replayed, remembered. Leo's body language betrays what his words never do. Shoulders tense slightly longer than necessary. Pauses stretch before decisions that once came instinctively. His hands, so precise, sometimes hover in hesitation before making a cut. Pride still exists, it has to. Pride is what built this place. But it now shares space with fear. Fear of letting people down. Fear of losing momentum. Fear of stepping away and discovering the world has already moved on without him. Silence becomes his companion. Conversations shorten. Messages go unanswered longer than intended. Those closest to him notice the change first. The way he stays later, the way he listens less, the way exhaustion settles behind his eyes even on days when progress is visible. Relationships begin to feel like obligations competing with deadlines. Rest feels undeserved. Absence feels dangerous. The irony is cruel. The very success that validated years of sacrifice now removes his ability to fail privately. Once, mistakes were lessons learned in solitude. Now they are moments judged by strangers who only see the surface. Leo feels his identity narrowing, compressed into a single role he must perform flawlessly. Builder, creator, content. Anything beyond that feels like a risk he cannot afford to take. At night, when the cameras are off and the workshop is empty, the quiet becomes heavier than the noise ever was. The unfinished hulls loom like unanswered questions. He walks past them slowly, running a hand along the grain, grounding himself in texture and reality. Yet even here, his mind races ahead, to schedules, expectations, uploads, the next step that cannot be delayed. There is a growing realization he does not voice, not even to himself. Precision demands presence. Art demands patience, but pressure erodes both. As the audience leans closer, craving more access, more output, more certainty, Leo stands at the center of his creation wondering when craftsmanship stopped being enough. And hanging in the still air of the workshop is a question no one else can hear yet. How long can something built on perfection survive when there is no room left to breathe? Before Samson Boat Company became a name spoken with admiration, before algorithms and audiences shaped daily rhythms, there was a quieter version of Leo, one defined not by recognition, but by discipline. The setting then was smaller, more contained. Workshops without lighting rigs. Tools worn down by repetition rather than scrutiny. Spaces where time moved slower, and mistakes dissolved into sawdust instead of memory. In those early years, Leo learned control as a form of safety. Wood behaved in ways people often did not. It responded to patience, punished carelessness, rewarded focus. In its grain and resistance, he found rules that made sense. The world beyond the workshop felt unpredictable, emotionally demanding, filled with conversations that required explanations he never learned how to give. Inside these early workspaces, silence was not loneliness. It was relief. Psychologically, his sense of worth began forming around output. Progress was visible. Results were tangible. A finished piece carried meaning without needing words. Praise was never chased, but its absence never bothered him either. Satisfaction came from knowing something had been done correctly, honestly, completely. Yet buried within that discipline was an unspoken trade-off. Emotional expression was delayed. Vulnerability was postponed. Productivity became a substitute for connection. Relationships during this period were fragile, often secondary. Friends noticed how easily Leo disappeared into projects, how time slipped away unnoticed when he was building. Romantic connections struggled against the immovable gravity of his focus. He was present physically but mentally elsewhere, already planning the next step, the next solution, the next improvement. It was not indifference. It was survival. Work gave him structure when emotions felt too abstract to manage. The chapter reveals how ambition quietly hardened into identity. Being the builder was not a role, it was armor. Each success reinforced the belief that forward motion solved everything. Slowdowns felt dangerous. Stillness felt unearned. And although the cameras had not yet arrived, the foundation was already set. The same discipline that sharpened his skill also narrowed his world. Foreshadowing lingers in these moments. The solitude that once protected him would later amplify isolation. The control he mastered would later be tested by forces beyond his influence. Even then, there were signs. Late nights that blurred into early mornings, conversations postponed indefinitely, emotional questions answered with progress instead of honesty. As this chapter closes, Leo stands alone in an early workshop, younger, quieter, unaware of what lies ahead. His hands are steady. His purpose feels clear. But beneath the calm surface, a pattern has formed. One that will one day collide violently with visibility, expectation, and fame. The cameras are not watching yet. But the cost of building everything alone has already begun accumulating, waiting patiently for the moment it will be impossible to ignore. The first time Leo's work appeared online, the response was subtle, curiosity rather than obsession. But as clips circulated, admiration grew into attention, and attention evolved into expectation. Samson Boat Company was no longer a private sanctuary. It became a stage. Light bounced differently now, not just from windows but from camera rigs, phones, and streaming screens. Every plank he cut, every joint he perfected, was being watched, dissected, and shared. Praise and critique intertwined, pressing in on him like a tide that never receded. The rise was intoxicating. Overnight, Leo became both symbol and spectacle. Fans dissected the minutiae of his craft. Social media charts replaced workshop measurements. Net worth speculations and assumptions about his personal life began to blur the line between admiration and intrusion. Emotionally, the experience was a paradox. Validation mingled with alienation. Recognition did not bring companionship. It brought distance. Friends and family were aware of his visibility but could not penetrate the invisible bubble that had formed around him. Even his girlfriend, once a steady anchor, began to feel the quiet pressure of sharing life with a figure everyone thought they understood. Psychologically, Leo wrestled with a growing dissonance. The skills that had once brought solace now carried the weight of performance. Mistakes no longer belonged to him. They belonged to the audience, magnified and scrutinized, a reflection of him that he could never fully control. Silence became both protection and punishment. He learned to move through public exposure with mechanical precision, the ease of earlier years replaced by a constant awareness that he was performing. The sensory world around him also shifted. Workshop sounds, once comforting, were now accompanied by notification pings, the low hum of recording equipment, the flash of phone lights. Even the warmth of sunlight on the hulls felt mediated by the lens, framing him for others rather than grounding him. He noticed changes in his body. Tension in shoulders, tightness in jaw, fatigue that seemed to linger no matter how much rest he took. He had climbed, but the summit was isolating, and the view was one of expectation rather than fulfillment. Moments of private reflection became rarer, replaced by scheduled appearances, updates, and careful displays of craft. Success demanded presence in a way that drained intimacy from daily life. And yet each day he returned to the workshop, to the wood, to the act that had first defined him, not as a public figure but as a creator. Here, in the rhythm of shaping planks, he sought the fragments of himself that fame had scattered. And so, even as the world celebrated him, Leo felt the quiet loneliness that comes from being understood only in part. The audience knew his work. They did not know his inner hesitation, the private ache, or the moments when the weight of observation felt unbearable. It is here, amidst applause and comment threads, that the first real question surfaces. What happens when the person disappears behind the persona, and no one notices until it is too late? By the height of visibility, the workshop no longer felt like sanctuary. It felt like a crucible. Every plank Leo touched was evaluated, every decision scrutinized. The tools that once offered solace now carried judgment. Workbench lights cast long shadows, reflecting both the physical objects and the mental pressure pressing in on him. Every delay in finishing a project echoed online, amplified by algorithms and commentary. Mistakes no longer belonged to him, they belonged to the audience. Emotionally, the pressure had mutated into fear. Fear of failure, fear of stagnation, fear of losing relevance. Leo's internal landscape was dominated by questions without answers. Was his craft enough? Could he keep pace with a world demanding constant output? Could he preserve relationships while feeding the expectation machine? Silence, once protective, now felt suffocating. His girlfriend tried to speak, to bridge the distance, but his responses were clipped, distracted, rehearsed. Conversations became transactions rather than connection. Psychologically, cracks began to show. Burnout manifested not only in fatigue but in emotional flatness, a sense of disconnection from the very craft he had loved. Precision became rigid, almost paranoid, a desperate attempt to control the uncontrollable. Every successful launch of a boat carried the weight of the next expectation. Every applause was a reminder that perfection would have to be repeated, indefinitely. Loneliness deepened, not in isolation from others, but in the isolation imposed by visibility. The sensory environment mirrored the inner tension. The low hum of machinery now blended with the constant background noise of digital life. Notifications, comments, alerts. Even the familiar smell of sawdust no longer offered comfort. It reminded him of the long hours, the unending work, and the audience that would judge his every move. Nights stretched long, sleep disrupted by anxiety, dreams infiltrated by imagined critique. Yet, amidst this tension, Leo persisted. He pushed, shaped, and built because stopping was not an option. The hulls of boats became symbols not just of craftsmanship, but of survival under scrutiny. Each vessel carried a hidden burden. The personal sacrifices, the unspoken exhaustion, the private moments of despair that the world would never see. And then, the inevitable moment arrived, subtle, almost imperceptible to outsiders. A plank slightly misaligned. A pause too long before a camera cut. A flicker of hesitation in his movements. The first signs of visible imperfection. The fear that had lived quietly in the background now demanded attention. The greatest threat to Samson Boat Company might not be external failure, but the very cost of surviving at this relentless pace. In the aftermath of relentless pressure, Leo stands amidst the remnants of both triumph and exhaustion. The workshop, familiar yet transformed, is quiet. Light filters differently now, softer, less clinical, catching the faint dust of a day's work. The boats remain, silent witnesses to both skill and sacrifice, but the meaning has shifted. They are no longer monuments to validation, they are reminders of endurance. Emotionally, Leo begins to confront the fragile truth. Success does not need to conform to the world's definition. Relationships, personal well-being, and the act of creation itself are no longer subordinate to applause or algorithmic validation. He experiments with boundaries, setting limits on public exposure, reclaiming time that had been lost to expectation. Reflection, once postponed, becomes a daily ritual. In these quiet moments, he measures not net worth or view counts, but presence, depth, and peace. Psychologically, the journey is uneven. Fear and guilt linger, shadows of past compulsions and relentless drive. Each day is a negotiation between old habits and newfound intention. Yet there is also liberation. Leo discovers that stepping back does not diminish his worth, it restores it. Each decision is no longer made under the weight of scrutiny, but from the perspective of authenticity and purpose. Visually, the workshop tells the story. The same tools, the same materials, yet a lighter air, softer gestures, and more deliberate pacing. Where tension once dominated every frame, patience now permeates. Conversations with loved ones become richer, unhurried, and emotionally reciprocal. Silence is no longer oppressive. It is restorative. The chapter closes not with resolution, but with an open-ended reflection. The world continues to watch, to speculate, and to judge. Yet Leo moves forward on his own terms, reclaiming identity from performance, finding purpose beyond the gaze of others. The story lingers in the air, heavy but hopeful, asking the audience to consider. Is stepping back a failure, or is it the bravest form of survival? The final camera lingers on Leo's hands, tracing the curves of a newly finished hull, and then pulling back to show the quiet expanse of the workshop, a space that now belongs entirely to him, yet carries the memory of every choice, every sacrifice, and every lesson learned.